You guys ready for some Haunted Mansion goodness?
Yeah!
Let's do this, Midsummer Scream.
Please welcome to the stage, Imagineer legend and creator of the Haunted Mansion's Doom Buggies, Bob Gurr. Producer of Kid and His Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and The Haunted Mansion, Don Hahn. Imagineering legend, Tony Baxter. Former creative executive at Walt Disney Imagineering, Tom Morris. Interior designer of the Haunted Mansion, Tania Norris. And your host for this presentation, Doug Barnes of the Season Pass Podcast.
I say that Bob Gurr was the beginning of my insanity from a 3-year-old. My parents still don't remember that at all. I called them up, I'm like, do you remember that? And they're like, no. But Bob, so let's go ahead and start about the Doom Buggies a little bit. Did this vehicle actually start with Bunce Adventure through Outer Space, or did it start with the Haunted Mansion?
Everybody thinks the Omnimover and the Doom Buggy started with the Haunted Mansion. How many of you know it never started in the Haunted Mansion? That was stolen from the Voyage to Inner Space, which was 2 years earlier. But the big difference was we found out with the Voyage to Inner Space, they have kind of a car that you could snuggle 2 or 3 people in. And it was our first time that operations found out a whole new side of guest behavior. So I'm not going to go in too far into that one.
I worked that ride for Bunce. That's so much, yeah.
That's all right. I was hired to do fun vehicles, and boy, that was the funnest vehicle.
Well, I was wondering, since you were there when they needed it, what was the conversation that said, let's get this the Omnimover in to be the Doom Buggy for the
Okay, if some of you remember the New York World's Fair in 1964-65, there was 2 other attractions that had a continuous line of vehicles. That appealed to me from a good standpoint. If you have a chain of vehicles, you can't have a collision, so you don't need an anti-collision system. Okay, we got that one done. If the vehicles are following one another fairly closely, you're going to have a pretty good theoretical ride capacity. Well, these 2 vehicles that I'm talking about, one rode sideways and one followed the vehicle in front. So all you saw was the back of the hair of the people in front. Well, that's not fun. So I was sitting talking to John Hench, and he happened to have a candied apple sitting on his desk, and I just absentmindedly picked it up and twirled it, and I says, John, we could make a chain of vehicles that runs on a track, but instead of putting the body on the vehicle rigidly, I could put it where I could turn it and I could lean forward and lean back, and this would give the art directors and the storytellers a chance to direct the audience into each scene. And it would also save them time. As you turn from one scene to the other, you can turn quickly and have less time lost in the segue between scenes. And it was such a simple thing, and I said, John, we're going to move a bunch of people, and we just moved in all different directions, and I was a pilot at the time, and there was a thing called navigational aid called Omni Range. I says, John, this is the Omnimover. So you got to watch out what you call your first sketch, because your name got stuck, and we never got a chance to give it a proper name, so I'm sorry, but that's how it developed. The writers if you remember, the Haunted Mansion was going to be a roly crump, scary walkthrough, and you can't control people when you go from a sequence of one thing to another. And as they saw us developing the Omnimover at 1401 Flower in the back, we had a little test track. They said, "Oh my gosh, that solves our walk-around problem." So bang, the Haunted Mansion who had been sitting there kind of dormant for years figuring out how to do it. They said, "We got it. We got the answer." So the Haunted Mansion changed and went a whole new direction of the idea that you have directed scenes, you have all the gags that you want to do, and since the track had already been going to prove itself out very well, the Doom Buggies came to life.
Right on. So we are going to actually go on to Tony Baxter right over here. And Tony, obviously, the Hahn mentioned meant quite a bit to you in your younger years, growing up at Disneyland.
Oh yeah, because for about 8 of those younger years, it was not open.
Yeah.
So you'd ride the train and you'd look down through the slats and the thing to see if there was any construction work down below the train. And so finally when it went into production, of course I couldn't resist being a ride operator out there, and I snuck in. So here's a secret. One of those doors in the corridor of doors, if you look closely, it's got an exit sign on it. That goes outside into the rear of Disneyland. It also is an entry for an employee that's taking his break and going over to sneak into the Haunted Mansion. I remember walking in that door and then walking down to the Madame Leota seance, and I just sat there mesmerized until a security guard came by and hauled me back to the other side of the park. Anyway, this is kind of interesting, the shot here, because Steve Davidson had come up with the idea of putting a Christmas overlay on. And he brought me, I was the head of the park design group there, and he brought me in to show it to me. It was just the night before Christmas in the Haunted Mansion. And of course we had this brand new property, but it was a touchstone film, if you remember when it came out. So it wasn't exactly approved for Disneyland. But we were able to add that one word in there, and kind of the rest was history on making the duality of the shows we have in Disneyland and in Tokyo. And so that's, you know, and the other thing would be the Hatbox Ghost, if you want me to go on.
Yeah, keep
he was in there for the first week that I wrote it, and I actually had a little card that I found that has proof. If you look on there, you can see number 28, Ghost Hatbox. So it was actually maintained for a while, and about a week, and I think a little video showed up of it. But anyway, I thought I was the monomaniac about getting it back into the house, but it turned out Guillermo del Toro is obsessed with that character. So at one of the Comic-Cons, he announced, I'm going to do this Haunted Mansion movie, again, a sequel, and I'm going to have it starring the Hatbox Ghost, so we can finally get that. They'll have to put it in the ride. And in the years that came on, he actually had one built for his collection, and some friends of mine were able to do that for him. And he did an incredible storyboard and whatnot. And then it fell by the wayside. But we at the park decided, you know, enough time has passed, and let's get that guy in there. So the Hatbox Ghost, and I really think John Gritz did an incredible job of, you know, staging that and everything. It works really, really well. So that was that aspect. And I don't know if you want to go on to Phantom Manor yet.
Oh, there's plenty of talk. Yeah, we'll bring up Phantom Manor. I just remember it was a few years ago. I remember you let me hold that card.
Yeah.
and my hands started shaking. And I was like, because I was starting to sweat, and I was scared that I was going to destroy the card by just sweating on this thing from my holding this legendary card. So I had to give it back to you really quick.
You know, for me it was the opposite. I was like, I'm not lying. I really did see it there. And so I was so thrilled when a really bad 8mm movie showed up with somebody actually captured this guy in there. So
yeah. Well, obviously you have been inspired. You've done a few attractions since then that are inspired by the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah. It was interesting when we went to Paris. We did a lot of research about the Europeans and the French in general, in specific. And it turned out that they got funny. They loved Jerry Lewis, and he's just a national hero over there.
Of course.
They also love scary. I mean, the Pierre Lachaise Cemetery. For those of you that love Gothic cemeteries, a must. You must go there before you die, or go there after you die. Yeah,
I'll be there.
It was an inspiration for Phantom of the Opera. Anyway, but they don't get scary funny. And that was the weird thing, because Mark favored the very comical things, and Claude Cote, who had ordered a screening of the movie The Haunting by Robert Wise, if you haven't seen it, it's a 1961, not the newer one from DreamWorks, but they watched that over and over again, and you can clearly see the doors in the haunted hallway pulsing and everything. That's from that movie, as is the wallpaper patterns that come to life. So there was a schism between Mark and Claude preferring the more frightening and Mark liking the humor. And so when we did Paris, we had the decision to make. Are we going to go humorous and keep it pure to that, or go scary? And I think we came down a little bit more scary on it, and they just redid it. I'm going to pitch something here. This great book just came out 3 days ago, just on Phantom Manor, and the redo of the ride is extraordinary. And they've even strengthened the story. It's real macabre. You watch the bride go from a young, beautiful thing to an engaging corpse at the end of the ride. And so, yeah, 3 of these are on order. I was hoping I could hold it up for you today, but just didn't get here in time. But yeah, so it's just been redone. If you haven't seen it in the last year, you haven't seen it.
Right on. Well, Tom, I mean, you've been inspired quite a bit by this attraction too, and you really went deep in studying this thing too, as well.
Right. Oh yeah, there's a shot right there. This is from the Big Green collection, who he was one of the architects in the later part of the history of the Haunted Mansion. Bill Martin. Actually, a lot of people were involved, as you all know. And I was one of those kids, just to back up a little bit, also, drooling on the gates of the Haunted Mansion. Just every now and then, if I had the opportunity to dig around, I'd dig around and just kind of take notes of things or whatever. But after 35 years of being there, I had a folder of really cool information and stuff. So I am now retired, and I am going to do a book eventually on the archaeology of Disneyland. And my whole thing is about uncovering new information, not retelling the same stories over and over again that you've heard, but finding new people who are involved, new information, new stories, new anecdotes, and why, obviously no one ever got hurt in there during those years, but that was part of the rumor mongering, was that it was so scary that someone had a heart attack or fell in a snake pit. There were so many rumors. But obviously there was never anything in there built significantly, but things did happen in there. There were workers that went in there from time to time, and the elevators were in there the whole time. And that was one of the reasons why they would have to go in there. They'd have to fine-tune the elevators. They would have to test them. There was actually an issue with them that they uncovered early, thankfully, that required some rework. So, if you were backstage, you might see people coming in and out of that cavern that you just saw in there. And then in later years, it was actually a parade break area for the parade. It's where the parade went. Fantasy on Parade I can't remember what the route was, but it went through Frontierland, and then it would park in that it was basically a big garage for the parade. And so, who knows what strange things occurred in there that might have started rumors. Anyway, this is a shot that, if you see my presentation tomorrow, you'll find out a little bit more about this shot. It's interesting. This is the graveyard. It's referred to as the South Graveyard, and this was originally going to be one of the exits to the attraction. And each exit was going to have 3 exits within that exit, because you were supposed to find your way out. So that's where that line came from. And this gentleman here is Dave Jacobs, who you may remember. And he's standing in front of one of the openings that's just right now in that picture. I think it's either a board that's painted black, but they had 3 of these little holes, little hamster holes coming up out of the Haunted Mansion. You were going to exit. You're going to have to find your way out in some sort of maze-like thing before that, and then eventually you would come out in this graveyard, and there'd be more fun little things in the graveyard. And the same goes for the other side. On the north side, that was also going to be an exit. This is when it was going to be a walkthrough, obviously. And this is a photo when they started building. Okay, so no one will believe this. I didn't believe it. I had one of those things where your memory is playing tricks with you, Tom. I left Disneyland. I went on a trip one time. I was really little. And as we were leaving Disneyland, this is 1969, April 69, because it was a birthday that we went to for a friend of mine. And we are leaving the park through the exit, and I see this building finally going up behind the chain link fence, which would be right where the Haunted Mansion would be. And it was still a skeleton of a building. And I'm like, they're finally maybe going to do the Haunted Mansion. Then years later, I went, April 69, what are you smoking? There's only a couple more months left. Well, it was April This picture is taken in either late March or early April. And they just worked fast back then.
And they built two of them at the same time because all
Right.
the material, all the animation, and everything was at WDI when I came here in '70, and they've been cycling to make sure it would last for Walt Disney World.
Right. Now this is the North Cemetery, the North Graveyard. It's already been filled up with dirt, so it actually goes down much lower, and you see two of the, they're referred to on the structural drawings as leave-outs, which means don't pour concrete here, leave a hole. And so there were three of those leave-outs on that side. The one that you see in the lower right-hand corner was eventually used to put the moving speed ramp up through, and so you exit through that little hole right there. But it very much was intended to be a walkthrough. It was going to be two separate walkthroughs. I've kind of seen chatter on some of the websites, that kind of hypothesize whether or not, and people debate, whether that is true or not. But I can tell you definitely it was going to be two separate walkthroughs. Each elevator would be dedicated to one walkthrough, and then each of those walkthroughs would exit in their respective graveyard. And they did a few drawings of that, including Carol Clark, the famous art director, who was the art director for Mary Poppins, was asked by Walt to work on this and lay out some of the rooms for this walkthrough version. And Yale Gracie was already buying, or he was specifying props for it. It really was going to open in 1964 or 65. They wanted it to open in 63. They were planning for it to open in 63. Yale Gracie was purchasing props. They were buying the glass for it in 1963, or at least big giant sample pieces of the glass. And Yale had his list. Carol Clark and Marvin Davis had done layouts for it. And even Mapo started engineering some of the machinery that eventually ended up in the show. Now, whether they built the machinery, I would love to find out, and whether that informed what would eventually go inside of the attraction. So that's something I'm kind of in the middle of right now. So I've kind of snuck these four, even though they're from Vic Green's collection. There are many, many more, and I hope someday to get this into a book about not just the Haunted Mansion, but about the archaeology of Disneyland in general. It's going to have to wait because I'm doing another book before it that is a little bit more urgent, that will trace the original Imagineers, track down missing Imagineers who we've never heard of before, because there's not just one sitting here next to me, there are many, many more that you've never heard of and that did amazing things.
Yeah. And then we have here Tania Norris. And also an interior designer for Walt Disney. So can you tell us, how did you get into WED?
By accident. I had arrived in America in 1963. I did my training as an interior decorator in London and had some experience. But I'd made friends with an antique dealer who called me one day. At that point, I had opened a very small office and was doing some model homes. She said, "I've heard of a job for you." I said, "Oh, forget it. I've got enough gray hairs." She said, "No, this is with Disney, and it's 1880s, and it's based in New Orleans." She said, "It sounds really up your alley." So I said, "Oh, all right. I've heard of Walt Disney." So that following, I made an appointment for an interview on Wednesday. That Sunday, my husband and I went to Disneyland. We walked down Main Street. We went into one of the areas. We had a hot dog, and I think we walked back down Main Street. And at the interview on Wednesday, I could say, honestly, I came to Disneyland. I was interviewed on Wednesday, and I didn't think I stood any chance at all of being employed, because there were a great many very sophisticated younger people, or young people, with great portfolios, and I had cute little sports cars. I had 4 pieces of paper from places around the world that I had decorated, and that was it. I didn't have any great sketches. So I had a second interview on the Thursday with Emile Curry, Bob Gurr, and I think John Hench. And then Emile Curry was the was head of decorations at the studio. for the films. But he had also had a hand in some of the design for Disneyland up to that point. I had a call on the Friday and said I had the job, and I remember sitting back in my chair and saying, "McKnight, you're an idiot. What have you got yourself into?" And I started work the following Monday, and for a couple of weeks or so I finished up my work and went into WED 2 or 3 days a week. But it was the most interesting time to be at WED. I worked with Walt Disney, and I actually traveled to New Orleans with Walt Disney, his wife Lily, his brother Roy, and his wife Edna, Bob Brown and his wife Sharon Disney. Claude was there, Claude Coates, Herb Ryman, who was there, Bill Evans, who was the wonderful landscape designer for so much of Disneyland and also Walt Disney World. He was there, and I think one or two others whom I've forgotten. Bill Martin was there. And there is a photograph of myself with Walt in New Orleans, outside, in front of the Gulf Stream, which we were about to board. You know, it's 50 years since I left, since I was in Disney. And the trip to Disneyland 2 weeks ago was quite thrilling. But my goodness, how much has changed. And change is a good thing, change is, I was saddened to see, just because of my fond memories, that some of the things that I did in the Haunted Mansion have totally changed. I remember buying a lot of junk, good things that went into the attic. There was a children's pram, there was all kinds of antique stuff and lots of cobwebs, and it really looked like an attic. Totally changed. The wallpaper, the purple wallpaper. Now, there's some history there that still has to be discovered. But I remember doing doodles for it. And I remember when I saw it the first time hung in the Haunted Mansion, kind of saying, I did that, and nobody else. Because nobody did. We didn't put our names on things. The wallpaper's totally changed. If you see the original, it's much more flowing, and instead of cutesy little owls, you have kind of abstract bat ghosts, totally different, but still same color and the same intent. But that's the kind of things that were changed. Much has changed, and it has to. Things wear out. Everybody has their own idea, but hopefully they have kept authenticity and detail and cleanliness as the three things that Walt wanted in that park.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as years continue to go on and you continue to ride on the Haunted Mansion, sometimes things change a little bit. Sometimes maybe it tells you a different story than it did before. Do you ever see new things when you go through a Haunted Mansion? Any one of you?
Oh, well, that's simple. Nobody messes with my Omnimover. Everybody asked the question, why did the Haunted Mansion get built so soon, but there was no attraction, no ride until many years later? Well, we had a guy that ran the drafting room for the architects over at 800 Sonora, Harvey Gillette, very strong-minded architect. He liked his building after they decided not to make it like a ratty thing like one of the Anderson drawings. Somehow Harvey pushed for, we'll finish my drawings and we'll pour the foundation and we'll build my building and then you can continue on later. That's the answer how that happened. When one guy liked his building that much, he pushed until he got it.
There we go. That's it right there. That's why that thing's been standing there for so long. Well before.
I always said that I think the best story in Disneyland is Peter Pan. It has one line to the story. Come on, everybody, here we go. And from that point on, it's you flying through the bedroom and out over London, and you flying off to Neverland, and you writing your own story. I think movies are, by their nature, they tell us stories within the movie. But at Disneyland, the best experience is you go home with a story that you created while you wrote it. And I think that Haunted Mansion is one of those rich experiences where, yeah, the guy is talking to you in the doom buggy, but the real story is being written in your mind by what you're picking out of that and seeing it. And to your other question about, you know, the changes, we don't have a filter like Walt Disney that we had once, who managed to know what all of us wanted before we knew we wanted it and build it like Steve Jobs did also. And now some of the things are good. I think the Hatbox Ghost, I'm really proud of how that came out. There are other things I don't like. I think one of the things we really need to do with technologies that are out there today and the ability we have to convert them into dimensional things is a little bit of stepping up to that line and going in there and touching some of the sacred things. I really think it's time to do that. I'd love to see Madame Leota done today with what I know we could do with that crystal ball. Because when I was a kid, watching a movie projected on a mannequin head was very exciting. But today, you know, it's time to move on in that, and I know we have things that could do that. So I think hopefully you'll all be impressed with the things that change, and that's part of life, and I think we owe it to the future kids to be just as excited about that. The worst thing could be for it to become a museum of things that were really exciting to us back in 1969. You know, the theory of it, of going into a place and getting the Jesus scared out of you, is still really valid. And so how you do that, though, is so much trickier in an audience as sophisticated as you are. You can probably go out the door today and buy a lot of the tricks that we have in the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah, that's true.
1962, someone told me, it might have been Buzz Price's son, David, might have been, said, oh yeah, that's the year Buzz said Walt bit off more than he could chew. Because he was starting up the World's Fair. He was at Disneyland. It was not only New Orleans Square, it was the Tiki Room, which was first going to be a restaurant, but now it needs really to be its own little attraction. And it was the Treehouse, and it was reconfiguring part of the Jungle Cruise and tearing out the train tracks on the west side of Disneyland. There were also some other projects that were percolating out there, big projects that never happened. But in 1962, I mean, I think that's the most interesting year, not 1959 or 55 even, but 62, when his imagination and his mind and his ambitions were going all over outside of the gates of Disneyland to other places. And this New Orleans Square was like, oh, if we're going to move the train tracks, then we might as well build a basement in there. Put a basement in, we'll figure out what to put on, it'll be New Orleans Square, but we'll figure out the details of that later. And while you're at it, dig the culvert for the Haunted Mansion, called the Haunted House at the time. So all that was kind of done, just like, get it done, it makes sense. You know, you had the operations people saying, yeah, that makes sense.
Such a different world this day.
And you had food people, because apparently the west side of the park was, there was not enough food in Disneyland in general, and then in 1959 when they opened all that stuff and the attendance went up, they were really scarce of food. So Walt was already interested in the idea of underground utilidors and that sort of thing. So we need more food capacity, so put all that stuff down in the ground, and then we'll build a New Orleans on top of it.
There was an interesting thing following up on what Don said. In the movie Cinderella, Walt was criticized because a lot of contemporary animation at that time was going very stylistic, and it was very literal and very believable. And Walt came back and said, if you didn't buy into the worlds I create for Cinderella to live in, then you're not going to believe in the magic when it comes time in the story for that to happen either. And I think a lot of what happens with New Orleans Square and the better things that work at Disneyland, it's so easy for you to buy into the story because it's so well done that you're willing to take a further leap than you might if it was just something you encountered at a carnival or a traditional way. So I think that was the leap that Disneyland in general took, and I agree with you, New Orleans took it to the ultimate believability.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom.
Well, New Orleans Square was why I was hired, and the research into that was intense. We went, as we told you, to New Orleans. We bought things there to bring back. Pieces of the iron were replicated. I actually was the one that did all the colors for the original outside exteriors and the interiors. We bought a lot of furniture which went into all of the shops, really. One person I'd like to mention, because I'm sure you've all been to the perfume shop, was an artist called Glenda von Kessel, who was an absolutely wonderful lady, and she did all of the reverse paintings, which took I think about 2 years from start to finish. Please do look at that. And think when you go to Disneyland, don't just think of the rides. Okay, we'll go to the Haunted Mansion, go here. Please look at the detail. Remember that the going down Main Street, I think is eighth scale, and it's not full scale. You don't realize that. Look at all the little detailing. That's what, to me, has made Disneyland part of the success today. And that's what Walt wanted. He wanted the detail. He wanted the authenticity. He didn't want you to really it to jab it at you, but he wanted it to be as you walk down. But please look and realize how much thought and effort. Disneyland's not a place for children. It's a place for people like yourselves that will appreciate what our
Wow. You make me cry.
What do you guys think about that, huh? That's amazing. All right, guys, well, I had a blast here just celebrating Haunted Mansion. 50 years. Can you believe that? It's a 50-year-old ride. That's crazy. But yeah, hopefully, it just continues on, it continues to thrive, it continues to inspire many people out there, like the ones that are walking out the door right this instant. It's absolute inspiration. Yeah, they're going to Disneyland right now. But thank you guys so much for being here today. Do not believe how beautiful it is. Thank you so much. Once again, all the way at the end, Bob Gurr. Bob Hahn, Layton, Tony Baxter, over-engineer Tom Morris, the Lloyd and the Tania Tania Norris, Hatbox podcast. Thank you guys so much for being here. We had a blast. Let's go, Midsummer Scream!